So welcome to the BioInnovate Fellowship Program informational webinar. My name is Brendan Staunton. I'm a previous BioInnovate Fellow from 2017-2018, and I'm going to be your host for the evening. So let's get going. So tonight we're going to give you more information on BioInnovate and how the organization has been responsible for the creation of over 32 medical device innovation projects and spinouts. We'll also cover the biodesign process that the fellowship deploys, and we'll speak with two previous fellows, Barry McCann, CEO of Neurosurgical, and Caroline Gaynor, Principal at Limestone Ventures. We're going to finish with a Q&A with Professor Mark Bruzzi and Professor Martin O'Halloran, both of whom are Executive Directors at BioInnovate. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab that should be visible at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to spend 20 minutes at the end on questions. So BioInnovate's mission is to be a leading global innovation hub, educating the next generation of healthcare visionaries and entrepreneurs to positively impact lives everywhere. So a very ambitious goal. So central to this mission is the fact that BioInnovate sits at the intersection of academia, industry, and the clinic. Medical device innovation relies on the combined skills of a number of different specialities, and collaboration is essential. So our location really reflects this need to work closely with other disciplines. As you can see, we're located in the heart of Galway, on the NUIG campus, close to the Engineering and Business School, and also a stone's throw away from Galway University Hospital, where some of our clinical immersion takes place. So we have a number of different functions. The primary one we're going to talk about today is the Innovation Fellowship. We also have entrepreneurship and industry training, along with incubation and acceleration programs. So BioInnovate is funded by Enterprise Ireland, NUIG, and a number of medical device businesses in the locality. We also collaborate with Stanford Biodesign, Oxford Biodesign, RISE, and a number of other European institutions. And the fellows throughout the fellowship actually engage with these other organizations quite regularly. In terms of the ecosystem, the Translational Medical Device Lab, the Health Innovation Hub Ireland, and the Irish MedTech Association also play a key role in developing that ecosystem. So the BioInnovate team is comprised of Professor Martin O'Halloran and Professor Mark Bruzzi, who we're going to hear from later, and also Professor Faisal Sharif and Anne Byrne, who is our administrator, who many of you probably have engaged with already. So Ireland is the perfect place to develop medical device innovations that can have global impact. So we've about 450 medtech businesses in Ireland. We've one of the top 5 global medtech hubs. 9 of the world's top 10 medtech businesses have a base here. We're actually the second largest exporter of medtech products in Europe, which accounts for about 10% of Irish exports. There's about 40,000 people employed, and we're the second largest employer in the EU per capita. MedTech is also the most innovative sector in Europe based on patent filings, and 10 of the world's top 10 biopharma and ICT companies have a base here. So the Stanford Biodesign process is a method of medical device innovation. And the process was developed by a team of medical device entrepreneurs, clinicians, and engineers who all had success developing medical device innovation. And they took their learnings and developed the process to make it easier for future innovators like yourselves to be successful in this difficult and complex space. The first fellowship started in Stanford about 20 years ago, and innovations developed by the process have so far reached over 4 million patients. BioInnovate was established to bring biodesign and the fellowship to Ireland, and there are 3 main phases to the process: identify, invent, and implement. Before we went to the process, just some details around the fellowship. It's a 10-month fellowship, and the fellows are split into 3 teams of 4, and each team has a commercial expert, an engineer, a clinician, and then usually a scientist. So this multidisciplinary team is really critical to the process. So coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is success. And that quote has never been more true when we talk about biodesign and the BioInnovate program. So this is where the magic happens, but it also is kind of the most difficult element of the process, as people with different experiences and thought processes come together to solve a common problem. However, lots of help is provided around the team dynamics and the structure to ensure a good fit. So moving on to the process, we'll start with the identify phase. So it's really all about needs-led innovation. So we don't build technologies and then try and fit them into markets. If you can take one thing from today's webinar, it's that we identify real problems and validate those problems before going into solutions. So how do we do this? So the first thing we actually do is we immerse ourselves in a clinical setting. So we spend 10 weeks in different hospitals around Ireland and abroad, and we're just looking for problems and, as we call them, needs. So we then develop them into need statements, which is a way for us to categorize those problems. For example, during my fellowship, we had about 420 needs at the end of the process. And they were from everything from a better way to dispose of a shark to a better way to complete a specific procedure. So then we have all these needs, then we have to find a way to screen them. We're not going to move into solution mode around 400 needs. So we do filtering or need screening, and we look at things like disease state, market analysis, competition, and burden of proof, and we filter those needs down. We also do a lot of stakeholder mapping on these problems. So we need to figure out how the problem actually affects the various different stakeholders, the payer, the patient, the clinician, you know, which stakeholder is, I suppose, struggling most with the problem. We also do a lot of procedure mapping. So this is quite a relevant procedure. This is actually a vaccination, relevant over the last 2 years that everyone's had. So we map the process, we look at all the different stakeholders, we identify the different pain points that are evident throughout that process. And that gives us a better understanding of the problems and the needs within that procedure. So once we've done our observations, as I said, it's about 10 weeks of clinical immersion, generally around Ireland. We then validate the needs that we've identified through the observations. We do more clinician interviews and really get to the root of those problems. And then we do other research around, you know, trends, drivers, disease states. And all that research together results in what we call a need statement. And this is really the foundation of the biodesign process that the fellowship implements. So a need statement is really a problem, a population, and an outcome. So a way to address a problem in a population that leads to a certain outcome. So some examples of a need statement: a way to reduce risk of reherniation after lumbar discectomy for sciatica to reduce reoperation. So the clear problem, a clear population, and a clear outcome. Another one, a safe, effective, minimally invasive way to treat pelvic organ prolapse in women to improve long-term surgical outcomes. So these are essentially the language of biodesign, and the need statements are really the basis of further research when we move into the next couple of stages. So once we've done the identify stage, and we have, you know, we kind of whittle it down to about 10 needs in January. Once we have those 10 needs, then we move into the invent stage. So this is kind of where the engineers really get to stand out. Throughout the process, there is different times where, you know, the different team members really get to lead the team. During the initial identify immersion stage, it's really a team effort to get out there and put the hours in, trying to get the observations and needs. So during the invent stage, we create rough prototypes in kind of a rapid think, build, rethink sequence. So failures really emerge early. So fail fast is another slogan you'll hear throughout the fellowship. And this iteration leads to better solutions. Again, usually around 10 needs. So then we bring it through brainstorming and rapid ideation. So this is part of the process. We train the teams how to brainstorm and how to identify solutions based on those needs. We then need to filter again, because obviously we can't have 10 solutions. So we use things like intellectual property, regulatory risk, business model, and prototyping to further refine the need or the solution. So then we move into solution ideation. You actually, you know, sketch out your prototype with access to 3D printing. You're really allowed to be creative in your solutions. And that's something that a lot of the engineering, I suppose, people really enjoy about the process. And importantly, then we have to go to even deeper level. We have to figure out how this solution is going to integrate into the healthcare system. The healthcare system, you know, particularly in America, has been described as the 8-headed monster. There's just so much going on there, and to actually have a product that, you know, fills all those needs for the various different stakeholders is really important. So we do go into depth. This is an example here of a nephrology solution, and this is the depth they went to in terms of actually understanding how their solution actually would integrate into a healthcare system. The final stage then is the implement phase. So this is where the commercial people like myself really have time to shine and put, you know, business plans together and kind of work on the more commercial elements. So again, it's testing the technology, developing the approaches around patenting, regulatory, reimbursement, business models. So we do, you know, a lot around kind of even the later stage things, how are we going to manufacture it? What sort of clinical trial do we need? Operationally, how we're going to run a potential business based on the solution, the finance required, you know, is it a $10 million raise? Is it a $2 million raise? And then obviously business plan. So when we get to this point as well, this is where I suppose the complexity of the healthcare system really, I suppose, bears its head. So we've got to talk about the technology. We've got to do IP searches to see whether there is any existing products. We have to look at reimbursement. Is there an existing code? Competition? You know, is there plenty of competition? Is there no one there? That could equally be a sign that it isn't a worthwhile venture. Funding, again, how much do we need? The market, is it large enough to warrant another player? Is it large enough to actually develop a product? Regulatory risk, is it class 1, class 2, class 3? Again, stakeholders, sales. So there's really a lot going on, but I suppose the process helps you manage all these risks throughout the process. And for example, if a market wasn't right, you would have found that out at the start. So again, the needs-led innovation approach is really what we're hitting on here. So just in terms of the actual timeline of the fellowship, starts in August. We have boot camp, which is a pretty intense month of learning. We'll talk to some of the previous fellows and maybe they might give us some more information around that. We then go straight into clinical immersion in September and October. Again, I think we covered about 10 hospitals in our fellowship, and it's a very intense experience, but it's really, really rewarding. And some of the procedures and things you get to witness and the needs that you develop from that are invaluable. Then November, we move into needs screening. So again, we're trying to reduce the amount of needs and pick out the good ones using those filters. And then December, then we go back and validate with clinicians whether these needs are real needs. So January, we're usually down to around 10 needs. I said that's when we move into solution direction and actually trying to develop solutions and novel solutions around the problems. March, then it's kind of moves towards business case preparation in April. And then we also have the option then at the end to have either a diploma or a master's dissertation. So does the process work? Well, I think you'll see from this slide that there has been quite a lot of success in terms of companies actually being created after the process. So, you know, the last number of years have seen a massive increase in that. Also, you know, that isn't the only reason people do the fellowship. We'll talk to Caroline in a second as well about other advantages of doing the fellowship. It isn't, you know, it isn't all about spinning out a company. So just in terms of quantifying the success, we've got 122 fellows, 130 entrepreneurs trained in the process of medtech innovation over 11 years. We've accessed about 150 hospitals globally. We've engaged with 1,000 clinicians. We've covered 18 clinical areas. To date, there's about 32 technologies who've been granted commercialization funding, which is kind of the next logical step after the fellowship. We've identified over 3,000 unmet clinical needs. And to date, the spin-out companies have raised over 150 million. So that kind of sums up the BioInnovate. It kind of talks a little bit about the process. And now we're going to switch over and we're going to talk to Caroline Gaynor from Lightstone Ventures. So let me just stop sharing. Caroline, welcome.
Thanks. How are you?
How are you?
Good.
My first question for you. What did you do before you did BioInnovate and entered into that crazy world, and what attracted you to the opportunity?
Sure. So I guess to go back to the beginning, originally I trained as a pharmacist, and after a couple of years working in the community setting, realized I wanted something a bit more meaty. So looked into pharma and got my first gig with Shearing back in the day. So started in clinical and regulatory affairs, and actually my old CEO then recognized that maybe I had a bit of a sneaky business streak in me. So convinced me to move over to the business side of the house, and originally started in female healthcare. And again, probably seeking something more scientific, pushed to move into oncology. So moved into the oncology business unit at that point. And at that time, Bayer had taken over, got to be part of pipeline planning on a global strategy team there, which was, you know, great fun. As part of that, and again, I guess so much of this happens just by chance in some way with some of the people there, realized that I might be good at health economics and market access. And that was becoming a really big focus for Bayer at the time. So they asked if I'd consider starting and heading up the market access reimbursement division of Bayer in Ireland, which I took on the challenge, and have to say I really did enjoy that role a lot. Did it for about 3 or 4 years over the entire portfolio of the company. And at that point, they'd offered me a job over in the US and the leadership team on the market access. And it was then I really started doing a bit of soul searching about, I had quite a lot of experiences across very different divisions, and did I want to become niched and move into that big pharma role, which essentially once you go, you're probably there for a protracted period of time. And I just decided ultimately that wasn't for me. I wanted to make the most of all my different learnings. And then came a period where I was trying to figure out, how to capitalize upon that. So it was actually by chance. I remember sitting at my desk at Bayer reading, I think it was the Medical Times or one of those mags, and there was an advertisement for BioInnovate. And I remember reading it and seeing it was medical devices, and thinking, sure, what would I know about that? I'm a pharma girl through and through. It's been drugs all the way, but the more you think about innovation, the more of it really translates across. And okay, I wouldn't have the engineering piece, but I felt there'd be engineers on the program, and sure, let's apply for it and see how we go and see if I have a skill set that resonates. And so I guess the rest is history. I still thank Mark for putting us through what was a long day of interviews to get on the program, but essentially started it and realized pretty quickly that, we could definitely manage it. And it was one of the best things I've done, I think, since then. So that's how I got to BioInnovate.
Very good. I think there'll be a common theme tonight around just, maybe you don't fit into the exact profile of commercial engineering. I mean, it is all about the interview process, and there is a range of different skill sets that are applicable to this process. Can you give me a quick overview on your fellowship experience, the problem area, the needs that you guys found, the process, the team, just a quick kind of, sorry, there's a lot there, but yeah, as much as you can on the process itself.
Yeah, sure. So we had urology in our year. And so that was sort of split into your more traditional urology type topics, and then also radiation oncology, and I guess how urology would fit into that bucket. So we had quite a diverse clinical immersion experience, I would say. We got to see everything from pelvic floor reconstructions to, many kidney removals, BPH procedures, and then on the cancer side, some prostate cancer approaches, and just a very wide range. So the clinical immersion phase was quite intense, as you can imagine, but you do start to see patterns, right? And I think once you see a pattern, it triggers you to go seeking something else. And I do remember that, we felt couldn't watch another BPH procedure. So let's go talk to the adjacent doctors and see if there's any other procedures we could get access to. And you start doing that towards the end of the procedure. And that was also very beneficial. So, so that was over the clinical immersion. And then we came up with many needs. Interestingly, some of them had nothing to do with urology. And I think that's a theme you'll find across all the various years, that there's some just universal problems that crop up no matter what therapeutic area you're dealing with. And then came the process of whittling them down. And in some respects, that's the most challenging, partly because you've only been experienced to the clinical scenarios in Ireland. And there's that global question, it's a need here, but is it a need globally? Trying to get to the bottom of that, and also trying to get to the bottom of what's the level of clinical evidence you'll need to move the needle in the space you're looking at, and is it feasible really to tackle that as a small startup? So that's probably the hardest part of the process, the most hours put in. But again, working with the team through it and having the good and bad moments was all part of the process and big learning experience. So ultimately, we landed on there were a couple of different needs in our team. The one we landed on for our final need, if you will, was overactive bladder. And we thought we might bring that through ComFund, but then it became apparent we'd need to first and foremost do some PhD work to figure out some basic fundamentals about the approach we wanted to do. And so, it became apparent it wasn't quite ready for ComFunding. So we didn't ultimately pursue that. But then myself and Kyle, one of my teammates, took some IP out of Mayo Clinic after that in the field of acute pancreatitis and pushed that one through funding and continued on that process for, I think it was 12, 18 months after. Took it to large animal studies and it didn't quite work as we expected. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, again, I think you're highlighting really diverse needs there, which is definitely a key thing that I think we've all came across. It, you know, you're given an area, but you tend to not be constrained by that area, which is a good thing. So yeah, I suppose I talked about some of the successes in terms of the spinouts. It'd be great to hear kind of your path after BioInnovate and what you're doing now and how I suppose BioInnovate influenced that.
Sure, absolutely. I suppose BioInnovate has fully influenced it, because otherwise I would still likely be in pharma, working in market access. So after BioInnovate, you know, I did want to try and take something forward. I think that was always something I'd wanted to do, and that was just to make the most of the background I've had and the learnings I've had. I thought, you know, it could be helpful in a startup environment, being a bit of a generalist, I guess. So yeah, so the first project was that one in acute pancreatitis. Challenging indication and space, many issues. And, you know, I guess as we worked through that project, through the Common Fund, it sort of, for me at least, highlighted the value of the Common Fund and what it's there for, that you're really able to de-risk a program, gives you the time and space to answer those fundamental questions to help you decide, is this actually worth, you know, taking out of college and using investor money to push forward, or is there just too many barriers? And in our case, there's ultimately too many barriers, and the case didn't add up. And so we I think ended that one project early. And then after that, I joined Mark at VTEX and annoyed him for some time as clinical commercial lead. And that was a very exciting phase for VTEX, trying to plan the early clinical days and, you know, get the device to the point that we're happy to go out and seek that seed round. And it was at that, I was part-time with that, and I'd also come across the guys at the Foundry, and it was originally helping them out. They had pulled me in on a couple of projects. One was around what is now Fire One, trying to, you know, diligence some ideas for what that company could be. And it was actually through that I got to know Lightstone, and honestly never had any intentions of joining venture. Knew it was a space I knew nothing about, for sure. And it was always that one area that sort of I reckoned I should probably scale up on if you're to go down the company route and just understand the mechanics of all of that. So originally they asked if I'd join as an EIR, and the original ambition there is, you know, as you're looking for ideas, if there's something you'd like to lead, well then you can do that. But I guess maybe it turned out I was okay at the diligence process and could grab my hands around some of the concepts of venture. So, you know, they ultimately asked that I join their investment team, which I did, and 3 years in that role now and still liking it. Still lots to learn, very different, but I guess it gives you a great sense of what makes a good company when you just see so many pitches, so many companies. And certainly, you know, yeah, still continue to learn there. So I guess that's where I am right now. And yeah.
Yeah, fascinating journey. Last question, what advice would you give to someone who is considering doing the fellowship this year?
If your gut is telling you to do it, do it. It's pretty traumatizing leaving a big job. I know. I certainly questioned myself for about 3 weeks that I was destroying my career forever, you know, leaving the big paycheck if nothing else. But, you know, sometimes it's worth taking the risk. I'm very glad I did and met all the phenomenal people I did in BioInnovate. Just the network it opens you to, and, you know, gives you the opportunity to explore a totally different way forward for yourself, which, you know, at the end of it may or may not work out in the way you thought, which is fine. But I do think it's absolutely worth the risk and jump in there and just see how it goes. But yeah, don't be afraid to do that and expect it to feel uncomfortable. It's meant to.
Okay, thanks so much, guys. If anyone has any questions for Caroline, can you please put them in the chat and we'll get them. Are you okay to hang around for a few minutes, Caroline?
Yeah. No, I'm good to wait.
All right, you've been waiting patiently there for your turn in the hot seat. I'll start with the same question. What were you doing before BioInnovate, and what, I suppose, attracted you to the opportunity?
Hi, Bren. It's good to see you. what was I doing beforehand? Well, I suppose I've kind of always considered myself someone who wasn't the normal kind of fit for BioInnovate, and you and I have had this conversation numerous times. But my whole background is, I suppose, kind of commercial and fundraising management. So I really wasn't in the medical or medical device space at all. I did a commerce degree back in NUI in 2000, and really since then, the majority of my career would have been in the not-for-profit space, working for various charities, and always in that kind of business development, fundraising role. The role I left to come into BioInnovate was business development manager with Connacht Rugby. So again, completely different to moving into this space. And it was a role I really loved. I mean, I'd been involved playing rugby for years. I'd worked in previous clubs before that. And I think that was really a big challenge for me, was leaving something that I absolutely loved to go to BioInnovate, and probably kind of create a lot of hesitation. But I knew it was also an opportunity that I couldn't really give up once I'd actually been accepted onto the program. I actually became aware of BioInnovate probably 5 or 6 years before that. And it was while I was fundraising manager at CRE, the Heart and Stroke charity. And the fellows in their first or second year had come in, and they were doing clinical immersion at the Heart and Stroke Centre. And I was chatting to Paul Anglum at the time, and just trying to get an understanding of what the guys were in for. And I just really found it fascinating. So for 5 or 6 years, I kind of just followed loosely the progress of what was happening, and I suppose I had made the decision that I wanted to move into the healthcare space. When I was working in CRE, I was working alongside, I suppose, some of the major pharma and medtech multinationals, but I was always coming from the not-for-profit side and asking them to come on board to do something with us or to fund something. I was fascinated by that space and wanted to kind of find my way into it. And yeah, BioInnovate ended up being that journey, that route into it.
That's brilliant. Again, I mean, the right fit. I mean, you didn't have any medtech experience, and you know the process. Afterwards, you're now the CEO of a medical device company. So there's obviously something to be said there about confidence as well that it gives you throughout the process. Can you give us a little overview on your fellowship experience, the problem area, and just kind of the ins and outs of it?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's anything that I get wrong, you can correct, because you were alongside me, my partner in crime, for the whole thing. So for everybody that's kind of listening in, like you and I were on the same obstetrics and gynecology team back in 2017. So along with two others, we worked all very closely for the duration of the project, for the duration of the fellowship, until it was time to kind of, I suppose, pivot and find our own kind of directions. And I actually kind of researched, or kind of went back through some of the notes of, I suppose, some of the hours that we put in clinical immersion, and it was staggering to look back through it, that we had, in the short space of time of about kind of 8 or 9 weeks, at various hospitals around Ireland. I think we had spent 9 weeks in 10 different hospitals, but between the four of us, we'd covered over 1,000 hours of clinical immersion. That was over 400 procedures between us, and spent time alongside over 200 infants in the neonatal intensive care units. And you kind of look back in that, in a short space of time, you're given this access in BioInnovate that is pretty much impossible to come by anywhere else. And we were just allowed to kind of look over the shoulder of surgeons and clinicians, and just trying to get an understanding of some of the problems. So that was really, I suppose, staggering for me, is kind of looking back at how much we covered in such a short space of time. And to go back to the start, I suppose you've given a really good overview of the program. That boot camp was crazy, it was intense, but I have to say, coming from my own background, and you know this, I was completely lost, and I did feel out of my depth. um, I had to kind of go home and always read up about what the hell we had done that day. And it was just my way of kind of catching up on myself, on catching up on I suppose, what was going to happen for the clinical immersion for the next few weeks. So it really was intense. What you'd learned during the day was intense, and then you kind of go home and really have to kind of, I suppose, prepare yourself for what's coming next. I was just after having, I think, my second child, and Teddy was 6 months old. So that was kind of thrown into the mix as well. My kind of wife knew that, okay, this is going to be 9 or 10 months of mayhem, and that she wasn't going to expect me around for a lot of it. It ended up, I suppose, being all of that. It was intense. We were having to I suppose, travel the country, attend various, I suppose, hospitals and clinician appointments and things like that. But that was all for the first couple of months of it, until we kind of settled down into the I suppose, the needs filtering phase. And when we came out of our clinical immersion, Bren, I think we had over 500 observations, and then when we filtered that down, it was 400 unmet clinical needs, all in obstetrics and gynecology. So we spent months then just filtering all that down to, I suppose, 1, 2, 3 needs that, I suppose, 3 of the participants within our team alone, we all went and, I suppose, secured comm funds on.
Yeah, it was definitely an intense experience, all right. And as you said, there is, a little bit of catching up to do if you don't have the medical device. But I suppose having good teammates always helps, right? And the fact we're still friends is definitely
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of questions been asked around the table in the evening.
Yeah. So what did you do after the fellowship?
I suppose if we took it back to maybe 2 or 3 months before the end of the fellowship, once our team had kind of settled on, I suppose, key needs and needs that really had commercial opportunities and were potentially viable startups, 3 of us went our own ways, and we looked to champion a separate need each. So in my case, it was really complications that were following cesarean delivery. It was something that we had picked up during the year, and then as we kind of digged deeper through it, surgical site infections following C-section is unfortunately a very common occurrence. So that was kind of the direction that I went down, looking for, I suppose, a solution for that. Now, knowing that each of my team members were tackling a different need, and my own background being, I suppose, a commercial background, I needed engineers that were going to come with me and actually try and develop a solution for this. So I'd written a commercialization fund application, and I suppose in the process just had been working on a network that currently had and had built throughout BioInnovate to secure, I suppose, partners or co-founders to come on board and join me for that journey if we were going to be successful for getting a comm fund. Very fortunate. I know it's a really competitive process, but it was fortunate to secure that comm fund. It provided us with, I suppose, a funding runway for 2 years to be based at NUI Galway and identify the proper solution that was going to kind of, I suppose, tackle the need and tackle the problem that we'd identified. So it was a phenomenal experience to, again, kind of have that support and have that nearly that comfort blanket of, we've got a little bit of a runway here. We've got kind of the backing of Enterprise Ireland to go and do this without needing to go out and get really early investment or funders behind us when we didn't know if our solution was going to work, and we really had to kind of, I suppose, nail down on a proper solution. So it was only, I suppose, at the end of 2020 that commercialization fund had finished, and the last year we've been kind of out on our own and I suppose entering various competitions as Newa Surgical is the spin out company, and really it's just a case of secure as much smart funding as possible to meet as many milestones as we can. And we're also in the process of raising an investment funding round as well.
Very good. And what are your ambitions then for Neurosurgical for the next 2 to 3 years? What's the grand plan?
What's going to be key for us really is getting, I suppose, human data as soon as possible. But after that, it's getting our FDA submission and getting FDA clearance. So that's going to be really key. We're very close to hitting our design freeze now at the moment. So from there on, we can map out a very clear plan of how long each activity is going to take until we can get to FDA submission. So yeah, a lot of really exciting milestones, hopefully in the next kind of 12 to 18 months that are ahead of us. You know, we're just trying to get as accurate with our budgeting as possible, take on the right amount of money, and just build as many kind of good partnerships around us as well. You know, certainly the aim is to, at some stage, be acquired so that our solution can actually be taken at a global stage. And I think it's going to be required that if we want to impact all 29 million C-sections around the world, it's going to be a bigger player that's going to do that. So I suppose there's no hiding the fact that we do want to be noticed by the bigger players, and we've got kind of key milestones to achieve to make that happen.
Amazing journey from the fellowship in 2017 to where you are now, and best of luck over the next couple of months and years. Final question: what advice would you give to someone who is considering the fellowship this year?
Yeah, I think like Caroline touched on it. It's, if your gut is telling you to go for it, at the end of the day, it's 10 months, and it's not only is it 10 months that's, you know, you're kind of cutting off all of your own salary. It is supported. There is the stipend. It's funded. It's an unbelievable challenge, and I think, I mean, for me, I'm an absolute supporter of the BioInnovate process, because there was no way in hell that I'd get to where I am now without it, and that's guaranteed. I think, you know, the access we had, the support, the networks, and then the network that's still there for us. You know, anytime there's queries, I go back to, you know, other alumni, and I figure out. And just today, I was asking a load of them about what do we do at certain kind of human trials, or who have they used for various things with suppliers. So that support network is phenomenal for kind of a small group of cohort of about 120 people. It's so supportive. So yeah, I think, you know, go with your gut, and it's an unbelievable experience.
Brilliant. I think that's another thing that highlights as well, is that support network. Maybe I didn't touch on that. As you said, even other 120 people all on the same journey as you, all being through the same experience, and that support that we give each other is pretty invaluable. So does get you into a club, which hopefully will have some success in the near future with companies like Neurosurgical. So we'll move to the Q&A section. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat now. Someone in straight away: how much is the stipend? Mark, I'll let you take that one, if that's all right.
Sure. Thanks, Brendan. The stipend is 30,000 per year. However, there is registration fees with the university, which are approximately 5,000 to 6,000 per year. And the purpose of this stipend really is to allow people to leave their jobs and come on the program for a 10-month duration. So essentially, this stipend is there just to give some living expenses and as a landing pad for people really to consider what their next steps are.
Okay, thank you. Martin, I'll direct this one at you. How are the teams assigned to the various areas?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of due diligence is done in advance on the clinical area. So we spend a couple of months just figuring out areas that are, I suppose, open for innovation, and where we can get good clinical access, and where we think that investor funds may follow. So each year we pick 3 different clinical areas, and then we try and match skill sets of the team to the particular clinical area. But I guess it's our goal that each of the clinical areas are equally attractive to investment and are equally open for innovation.
Okay, I'll keep with you, Martin. What budget do you get to explore an unmet need? So I think the question is kind of, do you get budget during the fellowship to look further?
Yeah, so it's essentially the stipend is your salary for the year, and really what you're given is just a lot of time and support in the filtering process. I think, Brendan, you made a great point about you're starting with 450 or sometimes 500 needs, and you're trying to find that one need. And if you think about what that is, that's the top 0.5%, right? Not even the top 1% of needs in terms of commercial opportunity. So sometimes I think we tend to recruit really good people, really talented people, and if you didn't support them at all and just gave them a year to figure out a business, they'd probably do something great regardless. But what we're also doing is giving you clinical access, mentor support, and then the knowledge of having worked with 28 to 30 companies before and feeding that back through. So I think what you're really getting is just a really good environment to innovate. And if you're interested in starting up a company, then there's a huge support there as well.
Okay, thanks a million, Martin. Caroline, question for you. What are the common pitfalls you see fellows face in the first couple of weeks?
Not sure there's too many. I mean, the first couple of weeks is mostly all about boot camp, and getting to know the team. I mean, maybe some people might find that part hard depending on where they're coming from. You're working in a quite intense environment with a small team, but other than that, I don't think there's too many pitfalls to be found. I mean, it's all material that's being brought to you and you'll get out of it what you put in. So if you're approaching it with the right mindset, I'm not sure. I don't see too many pitfalls in the first while. Certainly as you're, filtering out those needs, there's plenty of pitfalls, but
yeah, you do have your hand kind of held for the first couple of weeks with the boot camp, and you are kind of, all the training is provided, so it's pretty much just put the hours in for the first couple of weeks. Barry, question here for you from Adele. Let me just find it here. Thank you, Caroline and Barry, for sharing real authentic experiences and your own journeys. Any advice for someone with a broad commercial background without a medtech background? Barry, you're probably best positioned to talk about that. I know you've touched on it already, but maybe just a quick response.
I think probably it's really just, I suppose, take all of the info that's been thrown at you, digest as much of it as you can, and put in the extra hard yards kind of behind the scenes as well. And I think that's really, that was a big part of it for me, especially in the medical side of it. But it took a while, but I absolutely got there. And I think that can be the exact same for Edel.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Mark, just one for you here. What differentiates getting the diploma versus a master's from the program?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the program is aimed towards innovation, and this doesn't always fall in directly with academic qualifications. We allow participants to register as students within the program. It's a requirement, actually. Most candidates will register straight up for a diploma, but there is the option for some to take on an extra academic workload in terms of a master's activity. And really, with a master's activity, you're trying to answer or address a research question. I think I won't be able to answer that in a short snippet, but just to say that the program is really more aligned towards a diploma type of activity, but there is the opportunity to register for a master's for those who want to go that extra step.
Okay, thank you. I'll stick with you, Mark, for a sec. Just a few quick ones. Are international applicants welcome?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then there's a lot of questions around kind of, I suppose, the experience required. Do you need a degree was one question as well. Can you maybe touch a little bit on that?
I think Martin might have answered that question, but we evaluate each candidate for their ability to innovate and their ability to contribute to a team which is focused on healthcare innovation. So it does require a lot of research. And I think from an academic qualification point of view, normally we take people in with degrees or higher level degrees even, but more so experience. And we look for people with experience to be able to execute on projects, but also to be able to innovate.
Okay, perfect. Let me just have a look through here. What do they typically cover? Bart, and I'll ask this one to you. What do they typically cover as part of the immersion? Does it involve primarily hospital activity and visits, or does it also involve any coursework related to medicine?
Are you asking me? Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting question. So what you want is that you see the entire patient journey. So you want to be in the outpatient clinic, you want to be in surgery, you want to understand, how the patient is treated after, when they go home, and so all of the problems and all of the challenges that arise across those environments. So one of the things that we focus on is getting really good clinical champions who will, I suppose, guide that process. But if you want to, I suppose, come up with something very innovative, you need to see how the patients are managed across all different environments. So we try to have as much diversity in the clinical immersion as possible.
Okay. Let me just see, there's another one here. Yeah, this one is for, I'll go to Caroline again. Question for the past fellows. At what point did you pivot from the final set of needs to a viable idea and startup team? So I think it's kind of, at what point do you break off and run for the hills is the question.
I think, well, it starts becoming apparent as you whittle them down to the top few. And then at that point as well, each team member will have developed an opinion on whether it's for them to keep going and enter that startup environment, or whether they, want to move back maybe towards what they were doing before or take a different direction. So I think that all starts happening, at least in our intake. And if I can go back 10 years and remember, I think it was about April, Easter time. I think there was that natural sort of people figuring out what they wanted to do and deciding, if there were folks they particularly had a good working relationship with on the team who were equally motivated to take stuff forward. That all sort of starts coming together around then. And then thereafter, then you're crafting the plan forward or coming up with how you see the next steps happening. And if that's a comm fund, then that's typically something you apply for probably after the program over the summer.
Okay. Yeah, I think from Barry, you'll probably echo this from our experience as well, that it kind of depends on the team and the needs. And if someone feels really strongly about a need, they might kind of, break away a little bit earlier. But, everyone is encouraged to kind of finish the program as a team. And I think, as I said in the presentation, that's where the real value is that multidisciplinary team and all those different experiences going together. Mark, I'll jump to you just about the interviews. People are asking, are they in person, and what is the interview process?
Yes, thanks. Maybe I'll talk about the application process first of all. Yeah. We're looking for expressions of interest where people will submit their CV, and then we will review CVs and invite people, some people, not all, to submit full applications. Within that application, we're looking for people to explain a little bit more about their experience and why they want to come on the BioInnovate program. What is their motivation? Then when we get to interview, we have a short list that we invite, and without giving too much away, we're looking to get to know the person. We're looking to really understand what motivates person, how they react in stressful environments, and also how they can contribute to a team. So we have a full day of interviews, which is a combination of one-on-one interviews as well as group activities.
Okay, and another question related to that is kind of, when will you know if you were successful or unsuccessful, just from a time frame point of view? And also just one follow-up question around, do you have an exact start date in August? Is it the start, middle, or end?
So maybe the second question first. We do have a start date. I just don't have it to hand, but it's in the middle of August. Before the academic year kicks off, it's a nice time to start within the university because we get access to cadaver labs. We also get to run the boot camp activity with minimum disruption. So middle of August start date, we seek to inform candidates, towards the start of June. That's our target.
Okay. And on average, how many applications do you receive each year?
We receive well over 100. I can't remember last year exactly the number, but I would suspect it was closer to the 200. So it is a competitive process, but I would say that because we're looking for different disciplines, people with different backgrounds, we categorize people and evaluate people in different ways.
Okay. Caroline, question directly for you. I'm an aircraft engineer looking to make the jump into medical device sector. What advice would you give as someone who's changed careers?
So I think depending on, your past experience, it just becomes about how much can you bring to, the company as you see it taking that forward. So for me, it was, pharma moving into medtech. When you think about that process and finding a need, developing a concept, and then all that commercial piece, a lot of that sort of translated quite well, with the exception of maybe the engineering piece, right, which was a steep curve, and I probably know 5% of the lingo at this stage, but it's just understanding what you're bringing from your current job that can actually translate well into a different setting. And certainly for me, as it transpired, the pharma experience and all those different roles I've had through clinical, regulatory, market access, reimbursement, and indeed the commercial and strategic piece, all of that is fundamentally sort of the same. The product is different, but the process is the same, and the things you think about are the same. So, I mean, if you feel that that's something you can bring with you, I wouldn't be necessarily too worried about the technical piece. There's other skill sets and knowledge bases you can bring to this project outside of the, fundamental engineering part of it, which is also incredibly important, but there'll be that skill set on the team to bounce off as well. So yeah, for me, it's just about how translatable is what you have into this new way forward. That's your way to look at it.
Thanks, Caroline. Martin, quick question for you. Brendan mentioned that setting up a company is not the only other career path on offer. Can you talk about some of the other paths that you feel this course contributes to, with a focus for engineers?
Yeah. Like probably Caroline, you're probably better place to talk about this, but I think really what you learn about is, I would say, you become a really good critic of medical innovations. So you develop a really good eye for what a good investment opportunity is, or what a good research project looks like. So that, a lot of the big medtech companies, Boston, Medtronic, Abbott, now train a lot of their R&D staff in biodesign. And so, some of our graduates will go in and into those departments and work on new product development within the large multinational corporations. Some end up working for investment companies looking for new opportunities. But what I would say is it's really, really great training on terms of identifying what an investable business opportunity looks like in medtech. And so where you go from there really is really up to your own personal, I suppose, career ambitions. Some go the startup route, some go to multinationals, some go down the investment route.
Okay. Mark, I'll throw one final question over to you. Is there a platform for submission of IP provided during the project? So, just maybe talk a little bit around the IP around solutions that are developed within the program and how that works.
Sure. So this is a university-based program, and we're funded by a state agency, Enterprise Ireland, which in a state university. So all the IP developed on the program becomes the ownership of the university. The opportunity really is to stay within the university environment and to maximize grant funding that can come in while you're in this university environment prior to spinning out. So the motivation from the university is for people to exploit the IP, to create new startups, to allow existing companies to license research that has been developed in the university. So really, it's a double-edged sword in many ways. We're funded by the university and the state, so the IP belongs to the university, but really the university is motivated to license it to companies to exploit in the future. And I think that's what a lot of candidates look to do.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. It's around accommodation. So do you get hotels to stay, or do you have to manage your own living with the stipend? So the answer to that is the stipend is there to cover your living expenses while you're in Galway. Mark, are all the teams expected to be based in Galway this year? Is that
yes. I mean, that is an expectation. I think the last couple of years we've all had to live with virtual work environments, and I think that's appropriate for various different stages of the program. But I think the boot camp activity, the clinical immersion, has to be in person.
Okay. Will the initial training boot camp cover how startup funding is accessed?
Maybe I'll just continue with the theme here. We used to do that, and I think it became a fire hose of information when really people were trying to understand what problems they were going to look to solve. So we spread that out to later in the year in the boot camp. We really try and prepare people for going into the hospitals, for identifying clinical needs that align with good market opportunities that have the potential to innovate around. And I think later in the year, when people have those needs and have initial innovation concepts to address those clinical needs, that's when we start talking to them about the pathway of getting investment after the program and after any research grant that may come in to support them. Okay.
Well, I'll do two more questions and then we'll call it a night. What percentage of past fellows would have gone back to their original role? That's a good question, actually. I'd say it's quite low. What do you think?
I'd say it's very low. I'd say there's probably another subset who went back to their same employer, but in a different role. And then I'd say a majority of people either go to other smaller startup companies, state organizations, venture capital. Of course, the medics often go back to their medical career, but with a different lens. And then there's a good probably 40 to 50% who go on and take projects forward.
Okay. Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. Really interesting conversation. Mark, do you want to close up with some closing remarks just about where they can actually apply and kind of the deadlines, maybe?
Sure. All the information is on the website, bioinnovate.ie. And we would encourage people, if they have interest and want to talk to us more about the program, please submit your CVs and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much, guys.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.